This funny little shape helps you get the most out of your material and time when you practice. I'm going to show you why. Hey, welcome to the shop. Now, practicing your welds by running weld beads on flat plate, no matter what process you're running, is a great place to get started, but at some point it's important to practice with joints that are representative of the things you're going to try to build. Now, just about everything that's welded will consist of 4 basic types of weld joints, and I've incorporated each one of those into this little practice piece. We're going to talk about them one at a time because by practicing these 4 weld joints, you'll be able to weld just about anything. That's why we get a lot of practice on these weld joints on my new online courses with whatever process we're looking at. The first joint that we're going to look at is called a butt joint. Now that's where you have 2 pieces of material and they butt up against one another on the edges like this. So if you were extending something and making it longer, that would be an example of a butt joint. But also another really common place that I use them is when I have mitered tubing, because where this comes together on the top and the bottom is actually a butt joint. So you could use it there. I'm looking over at my clamp rack that I just built at the base, and there are butt joints all around that rectangular base. So that'll be the start of building our practice piece here, is to put 2 coupons together in a butt joint. Now the coupons I'm using are 1/8 of an inch thick and 2 inches wide by 4 inches long. Now something else interesting about a butt joint like this, the type of weld is actually a different name than the type of joint. So even though this is a butt joint here, the weld that we're putting in is a groove weld because it fits down in a groove. Now there are a whole ton of different types of groove welds and they get complicated when you get into welding codes and things like that. But this one here is called a square groove weld because they come together and the edges fit together just like a square up against one another. Now the next joint that you're likely to encounter is called a lap joint. That's where you have 2 pieces of material overlapping one another like this, and down in this corner here you'll put in what's called a fillet weld. Now a fillet weld is any time that you're welding into a corner. I'll continue building on my piece here by putting one of the coupons overlapping one of the others from the butt joint into this lap joint configuration. And I'll tack it in place here, and that will let us weld this butt joint probably on both sides and both sides of this lap joint. Now the next joint also uses a fillet weld, and it's really common. It's a T-joint. That's where you have 1 plate of material coming together with the other in the shape of a T, and you're putting that fillet weld down here in the bottom. So I wanted to be able to show you some practical examples of the joints that we're talking about. And right next to me was this tubing bender that I built from a kit in a video a while back. And this is just full of lap joints and T-joints and some examples there. So let's look at some of them. So here on the bottom, I built this cart and I have some little angle brackets that hold the tubing bender in place so it can't fall off. And those are held on with a lap joint, as well as this indicator protector right here. So this ring that sits on top, whenever you have overlapping plates, there's a lap joint. Now there are a ton of T-joints on here, back here on this lug that holds the hydraulic cylinder in place, as well as up here on the front corner. And right here where these vertical plates meet the base, there's a big long fillet weld in there, and this is an exact T-joint. Now along the way you can see that this fillet weld was not done in one run. This is something kind of interesting. I did this in several segments, and I started a few inches up from the end and welded all the way up to the end, and then moved forward, welded back, and in this back stepping technique I was able to avoid distortion, so that's a good tip if you ever have to weld something really long. Now to add the T-joint onto the practice piece, I just need to tack it on, but I need to be careful where I do it, because if I were to put it right up here in front of the lap joint, it's going to be pretty hard to get in there to that lap joint. Now if you wanted to practice, having restricted access or something like that, you could do that. But I think for those who are just learning, it's better to put it over on the opposite side so that you have access to the lap joint here as well as both sides of this T-joint, and that gives you 2 more joints to practice. As it sits right now, you have 4 pieces of material, and that gives you the chance to practice a butt joint, a lap joint, and a T-joint. And that in and of itself is going to give you pretty good practice. In fact, I started doing this years ago. I volunteered as a merit badge counselor for the Boy Scouts for their welding merit badge. And one of the requirements for that is to go through and practice these different weld joints. And so this was a way to do it without using up too much metal. There's one other joint that comes up pretty often, and that is an outside corner joint like this. Corner joints are used really often when you're building tanks or other things, but it's also really prevalent if you have, once again, this mitered tubing coming together here, and you have the outside corner joint that you need to weld together. So I have this tacked together here, and as a bonus, I can get 1 extra fillet weld here on this inside corner joint, which is going to be very similar to the T-joint. Now let's just think about what this does for you. Right, it took 5 coupons to build this, and you can weld both sides of each of these joints. So you get 8 different joints. That's 32 inches of focused, practiced welding in joints that are directly applicable or representative of the types of things that you're going to build. Now, if you are just getting started, this might not make sense for you. You might want to just put together a whole bunch of each particular joint type, just like we go through in my online courses. But if you are looking to brush up or you've been at it a while, this is a pretty good shape to be able to get some good practice in.